Deputy Presiding Officer.
Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion before us today. Of course, it has been a very short 2-month break, and therefore, as I try to get back into my usual stride, I won't be very long today, because I think this process is one that has been ongoing for some time, and therefore I want to focus more or less on the legal process that is expected to take place, or that should take place, to give life to this important proposal, Madam Presiding Officer. But before I get into the meat of this contribution, I want to as well firstly thank Almighty God for the fact that Tobago and the people of Tobago were spared any significant damage by the tropical storm Karen that recently passed. And let me also congratulate all the agencies, of course, the TEMA, led by Mr. Alan Stewart, and of course the Honorable Chief Secretary, the Tobago Fire Service, the Police Service, all those entities that contributed to ensuring, even Tech, that ensured that power was restored throughout Tobago, although in some cases not as fast as we would have liked, especially in the east of Tobago. But I think all the various agencies did tremendously well to ensure that, normalcy returned to the people of Tobago in a reasonable space of time. But I want to also single out some private citizens, some individuals from the constituency of the member for Palatavia, Lansome, Speyside, Mr. Glennon Sharp, a good friend of mine, another individual by the name of Jesse James, and other members of that community that volunteered their time and their effort to ensure that the roadways in that part of Tobago was clear of fallen trees. And interestingly, as I sat there and I recalled that moment, because I saw it, of course, on videos circulating on WhatsApp, and then I had a short conversation with Mr. Sharp via telephone. And I said to myself, those are things that you can't regulate. It's either you're good or you're bad. It's either you're willing to, be self-reliant, or you're dependent. So I want to congratulate those Tobagonians and all Tobagonians, for demonstrating the kind of resilience and the kind of self-reliance that Tobagonians have been known for many years. So we are here and we are talking about regulating the tourism industry. And I want to congratulate the member for Palatavia, Lansome, Speyside. It is not often that I congratulate those on the minority side. But I think in the absence of the minority leader, it's a good time to offer congratulations. I think your contribution was very exhaustive, very lucid. And I believe all of us in this house and all of us throughout Tobago, must in fact support the need for regulation and for the applicable laws and the applicable rules that will govern our tourism industry. As a matter of fact, I would like to suggest that we are years behind in that we should have gone this way some time ago, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, I want to speak a bit to the process. And I want to start with this notion that the Tobago House of Assembly somehow has powers of lawmaking in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm reminded of something that former President Carmona said. Powers they think I have, I do not. But powers they don't think I have, I have. And I suspect that some persons in this space, some persons around this horseshoe, tend to believe that Tobago has powers that in reality we do not have, Madam Presiding Officer. Because when you carefully examine the THE Act of 1996, and I was not old enough in 1996 to, understand fully what was happening. At that point in time, I was, 9 years of age? But But when you examine the act, and many of us would go around and say the THA has the power to make laws. My understanding of the act, Madam Presiding Officer, is that the Tobago House of Assembly does not have the power to make any law. As a matter of fact, the only lawmaking body in Trinidad and Tobago is the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I will even suggest that Section 29 of the THA Act, where it says, and I'm going to read it, although it was read before, but there's a specific part of the Act that I will want to zero in on to support my arguments. And of course, it says, 29(1), in the exercise of its powers under this Act, the Assembly may propose and adopt bills in relation to the matters for which it is responsible under Section 25. Such bills shall be debated in the Assembly in accordance with its standing orders, and if adopted, shall be transmitted by the Chief Secretary to the Secretary to the Cabinet with a request for its introduction into Parliament for enactment into law in accordance with Section 61 of the Constitution. But there's another part, 29(4), and of course this will be very relevant to what we are discussing today, Madam Presiding Officer. And it says a bill adopted by the Assembly shall not seek to abrogate, suspend, repeal, alter, override, or be contrary to any written law of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is the interesting part. Or impose any direct or indirect taxations whatsoever. So this means that the Assembly, firstly, does not necessarily have the power to make laws in Trinidad and Tobago. We could begin the process, we could debate bills, and we could send them to the Cabinet, and then Cabinet will in fact decide if it goes to Parliament. And you know, I will even go as far as making what might consider to be a controversial statement by suggesting that this proposal or this part of the act, if you ask me, is in fact nonsensical. And when you look at the history, we have submitted, as the minority councillor said, 2 bills before Cabinet, and we all know where they are at this point in time. And therefore, I want to once again call for the people of Tobago, of course, all of us within this room, and those on the outside, and even Tobagonians in Trinidad, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to really afford Tobagonians the opportunity to really govern ourselves here in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, the question is, how can we move forward with this proposal, which seeks to ensure that here in Tobago, that we implement some sort of regulatory framework to ensure that our tourism industry is properly regulated? And I want to say to all of us, and for all of you who know me, would know that I grew up in a fishing village called Buku. And of course, there are a number of tourism-related businesses operating in that community, from guest houses to what you might consider small hotels, restaurants, jet ski operators, reef boat operators, and other tour operators. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, I'm the owner of a boat. And therefore, I understand the need for us to regulate the industry. I understand the need for us to ensure that when our visitors come to our shores, that they receive quality service, and of course a product that is in keeping with international standards, Madam Presiding Officer. So there is no question about whether we should have regulations or not. But the question really is, how should this be done? And of course, the proposal coming from the minority is that the Tobago House of Assembly should engage itself in another process where we create a bill, of course, bringing a committee together and all of that, and engage in another process, sending the bill before the cabinet, expecting the bill to go to Parliament and to somehow become a Tobago law. And I'm saying that is almost a parallel process to what we already have in place, with members of the cabinet driving a process where a Trinidad and Tobago regulatory authority will be established to ensure that the entire tourism industry in both Trinidad and Tobago is regulated, Madam Presiding Officer. So as the Secretary for Tourism said, there is no need for us to reinvent the wheel. There is no need for us to establish a parallel process, especially if that process would encourage us to repeat what I consider to be mistakes of the past. Because let's be realistic. Because, of course, we like to look at the law, the letter of the law, and we like to look at things on paper. And oftentimes, we don't look at the practicality of what we are proposing. And I'm saying that when you examine the agenda of the Parliament, you realize that the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, there is a particular atmosphere. When you look at the kind of bills, anti-money laundering, FATCA, explain your wealth, anti-gang legislation, all kinds of legislation, of course, geared towards dealing with crime and criminality, and of course, corruption, Madam Presiding Officer. And that to me is understandable, because you have a situation where, as far as the Parliament is concerned, and as far as the people of Trinidad and Tobago is concerned, this is the major thing on the agenda: crime. The fact that the murder rate continues to be significantly high. The fact that corruption has been a problem in this country for many years. And of course, that is the atmosphere, and that is the focus of the central government at this point in time. And therefore, we expect as an assembly that we should be able to send bills to the cabinet. They must put off their agenda, look at this Tobago bill, and of course make a decision as to whether the bill should go to Parliament or not. And of course, if it gets to Parliament, the Parliament must then debate and decide if they're going to pass this Tobago specific bill. And that is why, Madam Presiding Officer, I am tremendously in love with the Tobago Self-Government Constitutional Amendment Bill. I may not have gotten the phrase in the correct order, which proposes, Madam Presiding Officer, that there in fact be a Tobago legislature, which comprises of the President, a proposed People's House, and of course the Assembly with some minor changes, I think one Assemblyman and one additional councillor or something of this sort. And I'm saying that is in fact true autonomy, where the people of Tobago, where the elected representatives of Tobago can in fact debate bills, can in fact pass laws, without it having to go to another body in Trinidad called the Cabinet, or without it having to go to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm saying, had we been operating in that context, then it would have made sense, Madam Presiding Officer, for us to be considering the approach that the minority is bringing before us today. But in the present context, given the reality of the THA Act, and I know sometimes those on the minority side will make suggestions for us to repeal and strike down laws, especially when members on their side get into trouble with particular laws. But I will never suggest, Madam Presiding Officer, that we strike down the THA Act in its present form. Of course, I'm all for internal self-government, and therefore I await the day when the people of Tobago will be afforded their deserved right to self-determination, Madam Presiding Officer. And I want to suggest to us that that will not be in the too distant future, Madam Presiding Officer. So, of course, any regulatory framework will in fact include licensing, Madam Presiding Officer. And I would want to suspect that any framework which includes licensing should in fact have licensing fees attached. As a matter of fact, like the member for Palatovia Lansing Speyside, I also looked at other frameworks throughout the world. And I looked at our very close neighbors, Barbados' context. And of course, they have a Barbados Tourism Authority. And that body has significant responsibilities from promotion, marketing, and they also have responsibility for regulating. And of course, we have taken a different approach where we already have an agency with responsibility for marketing and promotion. And of course, we're now looking at how we regulate the industry. But you have a situation where in Barbados, every single tourism-related business, hotel, guest house, restaurants, tour operators, they must in fact be licensed. And of course, in order to do that, they must meet certain requirements, and the tourism authority has the powers to draft and implement regulations accordingly. And of course, these powers are given to them through an act of parliament, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, after a prescribed period of time, all these entities must ensure that they renew their licenses. And that comes with a fee, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, some may consider it a tax, a form of taxation. Some may want to consider it as taxation indirectly. And therefore, the question begs, can the Tobago House of Assembly, in its current form, implement or propose any legislation which seeks to tax, whether directly or indirectly, Madam Presiding Officer? And therefore, that is one of the challenges that I have with the current motion before us, Madam Presiding Officer. But not only that, because you can't have regulation, in my opinion, without consequences. And I'm saying those consequences must, in fact, be accompanied by fines or jail term. So when you look at Section 25 of the Barbados Tourism Authority Act, and I want to read it, because there are two situations in which you could be fined or you could end up in prison. So 26(1), no person shall manage any tourist accommodation, tourism enterprises, tourism product, or operate as a tourism service provider unless that person first applies to the authority for and obtains a license issued under this act, Section 26. And of course, if you flout that law, you are likely to be fined up to $10,000 or face 1 year imprisonment. And the other offense, Madam Presiding Officer, can be found can't find the exact section and I wouldn't look for it. But it has to do, Madam Presiding Officer, with refusing to give access to agents of the authority so they can inspect not only your property, but also your books, your policies, and whatever other documentations you have with relation to the management and the operations of your property or your tourism-related business, Madam Presiding Officer. And if you flout that law, or you refuse to obey that law, Madam Presiding Officer, you can in fact face a fine of up to $1,000, and I believe they're speaking Bajan dollars, or up to 6 months in prison, Madam Presiding Officer. So again, you have the authority, you have the agency with the, not the agency, the Barbados Tourism Authority who has the responsibility to promote, market, and establish regulations. And within the law, there's a prescription where persons failing to observe those two areas of the law, failing to be licensed firstly, which carries the larger penalty, and of course failing to allow agents of the authority access to your premises or access to your boat or whatever, which carries a smaller penalty, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying when it comes to regulation, the consequences are far-reaching. It should involve licensing, and I'm saying there should be some fees attached to that, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying given those ramifications, the Tobago House of Assembly, in its present context, governed under the present THA Act, does not have the authority, Madam Presiding Officer, to engage in establishment of such legislations. And therefore the question is, would it not be a better course of action to continue to collaborate with the central government on a process that began since March 2017 as we move along towards, of course, the first proposal was to establish 2 agencies on each island with responsibility for promoting and marketing the 2 unique products of the 2 islands, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, following that, the need to establish a regulatory agency, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying we on this side, we are saying that the better approach is to continue along this path, support the ministry, collaborate with the ministry, and in some cases, Madam Presiding Officer, apply pressure. Because I'm saying, given the unique context, Tobago and Trinidad, national issues versus local issues, and I'm saying we ought to be realistic. Because one of the reasons we are in this position today is that there was never really a need for us to focus on tourism as a country, Madam Presiding Officer. It might have been a want, but it wasn't a need. And therefore, when you look at destinations like Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, who didn't have oil, who didn't have other things to depend on, for them it was a need. And therefore, now that we are faced with circumstances which warrants Tobago to produce more and do more, not just in terms of tourism, but also agriculture and maybe renewable energy and other sectors in which we could find ourselves in, we must ensure that we take the necessary action not only as leaders, but as a people on this island to ensure we play a greater role in the economic development and advancement of this country, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying, yes, we need regulation. We must regulate the tourism industry. And we must ensure that persons are forced to abide by those regulations, Madam Presiding Officer. But I'm saying as well that the better approach is to continue collaboration with the central government to ensure that we have this done in the very near future, Madam Presiding Officer. But the reality is, as I close, as I said, I will not be very long. The reality is that there are some things that we can do and should in fact be doing now, Madam Presiding Officer. Because I'm saying there are some things that should never have to be regulated. And of course, within our society, you have different kinds of people. You have good, you have bad people. And I wouldn't say ugly because I don't want anybody to suggest that the Assemblyman for Bukom Unpleasant refer to anybody as ugly, Madam Presiding Officer. But I'm simply saying you have good people who will ensure that they put their best foot forward, regulations or not, who will ensure that if they have a reef boat or any kind of boat, that they will observe the rule of law. And therefore, if your boat could safely carry 20, you wouldn't put 50 on it for a few dollars more, because you understand the harm that it could do to our tourism industry. And not only the tourism industry, but you understand the potential danger that you are bringing to the lives of those that you serve. And I'm saying there are persons who will understand that. There are persons who will understand that without effective customer service, you could never, in fact, have a successful business. There are those who will understand that in order for a business to be maintained and in order for a business to continue to be relevant and sustainable, that you have to reinvest some of your profits in its upkeep and upgrades. But the reality, Madam Presiding Officer, is that there are some of us who are not like-minded. And therefore, I want to urge all of us, and I want to speak specifically to the local tourists, those coming from Trinidad, or even those here in Tobago, because we have a responsibility, and I'm going to tell you about the responsibility just now. Because I'm saying we will do our work. We will continue to ensure that we take the necessary steps to bring these proposals to fruition. But the reality is, at this point in time, we don't have the regulations in place, apart from the voluntary ones, of course. The reality at this point in time is that tomorrow, if you decide to go rent a jet ski or go on a boat tour, etc., the reality is that those operators are not bound to any legal requirements as it relates to tourism-based regulations. And therefore, I'm saying it is up to us to come up with some of our own regulations, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, in the meantime, I am calling on the people of Tobago to be selective in their choices. Because the reality is, when you go to buy food and the food tastes good, you go back and you buy it. And if the food don't taste good, you look for somewhere else. And I'm saying that must apply to the tourism sector. I'm saying we must not allow persons to destroy our tourism industry. So I liked, as the member from the minority side, member for Palatoville and some SP side, I like the fact that he read onto the record a particular Facebook review, but I was disappointed that he didn't call a name, and that's his choice. Because I'm saying there must come a time where we must begin to expose and reject the folly of some of our stakeholders here in Tobago. I'm saying there must come a time where we must refuse to accept mediocre service. We must refuse to accept dangerous products and services offered as tourism products and services. We must refuse to board overload boats just because it costs $100 or $50 less than the standard price. We must refuse to put our lives at risk. And I'm saying, and the touts is another story, but I'm saying we have a situation. I and all experience it from time to time, and I'm going to tell you this story. Driving into Pigeon Point, not interested in any reef boat tour, but I was going to get some crab and dumpling. And as I stopped at Strawberry Junction to make the right, 4 young men ran up on my vehicle. And I know they were touts, so I was not necessarily afraid that I was going to be robbed or anything like that. But I'm saying you can imagine one of our visitors being unaware of that situation. And as you stop to make a right turn into what is supposed to be one of Tobago's hallmark locations, 3 or 4 young men, not dressed professionally, not conducting themselves professionally, run up on your vehicle, start knocking on your glass. You don't know if to screw down the glass, you don't know if to open the door and run outside, you don't know what to do. And I'm saying 200 meters away from that, we have a Crown Point police station. And therefore the question has to be asked, is it that we are so helpless in that situation that the police cannot find any laws to enforce in that circumstance, or the very members of that sector, the very reef boat owners and operators, if they can't do anything about that untenable situation, Madam Presiding Officer. So the point I am trying to make is that all of us have a responsibility to ensure that the tourism industry here in Tobago continues to grow, continues to flourish, but is also protected from bad persons and bad characters who are intent on destroying the industry just for a few dollars more, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying all of us have that responsibility. Because I'm saying there are others operating in the same context. But do you understand that if you're buying a boat and your boat could seat 15, don't carry 20? Do you understand that if your boat could seat 10, you should have 10 life jackets on board? Do you understand that if you have a guest house?
Member, your speaking time is up.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg that the member's time be extended by a further 10 minutes.
Members, the question is that the member's time be extended by a further 10 minutes. All in favor? Any against? Member, your time has been extended by a further 10 minutes.
I was supposed to be short, but sometimes you get carried away. So I'm saying, Madam Presiding Officer, we have a responsibility as well to ensure that certain characters do not negatively or adversely continue to adversely impact our tourism industry here in Tobago. Because I'm saying there are others who, even without regulations, they ensure that they do what they are supposed to do. Those with properties who ensure that, come on, you can't have a pillow, the pillow is supposed to be white, or the pillow walnut, like this wood, Madam Presiding Officer. You can't have a sheet that's supposed to be a white sheet, but it polka dot in brown and white, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying there are some who understand that. Simple things. They need to change your sheets from time to time. They need to change your linen and other things from time to time. They need to ensure that your premises are safe, whether it's a step with a broken tile or things like these. I'm saying there are those who understand that, because I've been to some properties, some of them right in Boko, Madam Presiding Officer, and I'm saying they are kept at an acceptable standard. So all of us must do our part, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, as I close, I want to read the final two parts of the proposed amended motion, where it says, firstly, be it resolved that the Tobago House of Assembly continues its collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism in pursuing mandatory regulations through the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority for the tourism sector. And last but not least, be it further resolved that this House call upon all tourism stakeholders to pursue and maintain the current established international industry standards, Madam Presiding Officer. So once again, I want to also congratulate every tourism stakeholder, car rental owners, boat tour operators, especially those in Speyside. I saw a Facebook post recently where this particular reef boat operator seemed to be well prepared, proper uniforms, boat looking in good condition, etc. And I want to congratulate those who go the extra mile to ensure that what they are offering reflects the tourism industry that we want to establish here in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying even those who go the extra mile of educating themselves, especially the reef tour operators, so that those who experience those tours can in fact come back to land or come back to shore, knowing a thing or two about the reef or the mangrove and the corals, and therefore not just being exposed to ganja smoke and hard pong, as was demonstrated in the review previously mentioned earlier by the member for Palato Via Lansom Speyside. So I'm saying again, the responsibility is all of us. And even as we move towards establishing much needed regulations, in the meantime, there are approaches, there are responsibilities that we as Tobagonians must ensure that we fulfill, not only to some tourism industry, but to ourselves as a people, Madam Presiding Officer. I thank you.